obviously the big news is that Willie Mays passed away yesterday. Some might call him the greatest player of all time. Opinions. You might say it's Babe Ruth. You might say it's Joe DiMaggio. Some might say Barry Bonds. But a lot of people do say it's Willie Mays. Now, because of his greatness and his iconic status, a lot of people think that maybe number 24 should never be worn again. Listen to Buster Olney, who had a discussion when the Yankees were playing the Dodgers with Spike Lee. Listen to what Buster said.
We had recently the game between the Dodgers and the Yankees, and I ran over to do the interview and get in position to do the interview with Aaron Boone, the Yankees manager, in the middle of the game, and I hear behind me, Buster, and it was Spike Lee, who I think I talked to him like 25 years ago, but I hadn't talked to him since, and he looked at me, and the first thing he said to me was, what do you think? We retire Willie Mays as 24? You think we ought to do that? And I mean, we have Jackie Robinson's number 42 retired. I personally think they should retire Roberto Clemente's number. And when he said that, I was like, yes, Spike, I think you're right. Because he, as I say, I think he's the greatest player of all time because of the style, because of the dominance that he was, because of the joy that he played with.
All right, so, Don and I and Peter, we were talking about this before the show. It certainly leads to a precedent that you're going to be very, very difficult containing. Okay, so some people think that he's the greatest player of all time, and that's legitimate. Well, Joe DiMaggio was considered the greatest living player while he was still with us. No one said they should retire number 5. Now, Wayne Gretzky, some say he's the greatest hockey player of all time. 99 is retired. Gordie Howe's not retired. So, Don, I know you have strong feelings about this. What's your take on retiring 24? And I like what Buster said. I mean, a lot of people say that Clemente's 21 should be retired. So, what's your thoughts on this?
I'm sorry, you got to draw the line someplace. I have a problem with the NHL retiring 99, and I'm a Wayne Gretzky guy. I think he's phenomenal. He's the greatest player that I ever saw. He bought me a burger.
That's right. Sure he did.
But just because you're the greatest of all time, like that's reason enough to retire your number. There are many people that think Bobby Orr was the greatest. You retire number 4. You mentioned Gordie Howe's number 9. That's not retired. There are people in Pittsburgh that think Mario Lemieux is among the greatest of all time. Should 66 never be worn? Should 23 Jordans never be worn?
Should number 3 Babe Ruth never be worn?
So I think you got to be more than just the greatest player. And I think Jackie Robinson transcended sports. So that's why 42 can't be worn, because of the color barrier, what he had to go through. It's not so much that he was a great ball player, but what he went through and what he meant to the history of not just baseball, but to this country.
Yeah.
So that's why 42 is retired. Now, Roberto Clemente is interesting because he was such an important figure outside of baseball and how much he helped people, how he died, for God's sakes, trying to help earthquake victims. So then that could be a conversation. But just because you're great at your sport, so does that mean LeBron James' number has to be retired? Does that mean that Tom Brady's number has to be retired? I'm sorry. I love Wayne Gretzky. But I think there needs to be more than just how great you were at the sport. No. Otherwise, you're going to be starting to retire a lot more than just a handful of numbers. And as great as Willie Mays was, well, then should number 7 then be retired and nobody wear number 7 for Mickey Mantle? I just think Jackie Robinson is one thing, Roberto Clemente is one thing, but everybody else, just because you're a great player, to me, that's not enough.
I mean, I think the fact that it's just Jackie Robinson is what makes it special.
Right, I mean, and also Jackie Robinson did something that I'm sorry, I don't want to be overly dramatic. It changed the world. So if you put just great players and say their numbers can never be worn again, which hockey has done with Gretzky, and Don doesn't think they should have, well, Ruth has to be retired. Number 3 has to be retired. So if you're going to retire, and this is probably an awful time to even bring it up because, of the passing of Willie, and all we're doing is deifying him throughout the show. That's how great he was. Right. But to take 24 out of circulation just doesn't seem right because of the greatness of a player. And again, it's a subjective opinion. Yeah, I think he might have been the best player of all time, but there are others that would make the argument that DiMaggio was or Ruth was.
Or Garrick.
And we can go on and on.
So
just because it's subjective, well, then everybody who has a thought about who the greatest player of all time is, you have to retire their number 2. Let's take out the PED aspect. Barry Bonds might be the greatest player of all time. You're retiring his number? Now, it's retired in San Francisco. Willie's is retired in San Francisco. Willie's retired with the Mets. But you want 24 to be taken out of circulation around the game? I don't know, man. It just doesn't seem right.
Again, I'm not trying to knock Wayne Gretzky, but he's as humble as anybody, so he probably would agree with me. And I know Gretzky grew the sport. Would there be a Florida Panthers if it wasn't for Wayne Gretzky when he got traded to L.A. and how he was able to bring hockey to the non-traditional markets? I know how much he meant to the sport. But, again, you compare it to Jackie Robinson, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? I mean, because Jackie wasn't about the game. It was about beyond the game. So, hey, you're entitled to do what you want as your sport, but if you're going to retire Willie Mays, then are you going to retire Mickey Mantle? Or are you going to retire Bryce Harper at some point if he continues to put up the numbers that he's doing, or wants where do you draw the line? There's always going to be the next great player.
If you're going to retire Willie Mays, right? Well, why isn't number 44 retired for Hank Aaron around baseball? Why?
Right. And look,
Hank Aaron's one of the greatest players who ever lived. His number should be retired too.
And you look at what Hank Aaron had to go through when he was chasing after Ruth. So everybody's going to be able to come up with their reasoning why. But can anybody come up with anything as big as Jackie Robinson? So I just think it's got to be more. And I'm not here to disrespect Willie Mays, but Willie Mays was a great player. But I'm sure there were Yankee fans saying that they would take Mickey Mantle or Joe DiMaggio over him. Right? And so now it becomes like a debatable situation. You could say, well, Wayne Gretzky, we talked right last week, Peter, is there any greater gap between Wayne Gretzky and everybody else? But you talked to, I've heard Howie Rose say this. I know Don Cherry said it in Canada. They believe that Bobby Orr was better or the Gordie Howe was better. So now we're getting into a debatable situation. Could anybody debate that 42 should be retired? Can anybody ever stand up and say he wasn't deserving of his number being retired? No.
I have to be honest. I enjoy talking about nonsense as much as the next guy, but this is honestly, it's an absurd conversation. That the suggestion's absurd. A league-wide retirement only makes sense for someone who completely transcends the game for things they do beyond that. Otherwise, you get retired on your team. That's how it works. They didn't retire Kobe's number throughout the league when he died. And think about how great Kobe was and how recently he had been playing. There's not a player in the league who probably would have objected to doing that. But they didn't do it there. You're never going to do it.
The thing is that the reason Jackie Robinson's numbers retired and what he was able to, never mind what he went through, but how he handled it. Because if he charged the mound, if he jumped into the crowd, if he gave in to the racism, which would have been completely understandable, it would have set the sport back as far as African Americans 20 years. Because you think anybody else would call anybody up if Jackie didn't handle it right? How much longer would it have taken? For some teams, it still took another decade before they took a chance on an African American. So that opened the doors for a whole race of people to feel comfortable to play Major League Baseball, and opened the doors for other businesses in this. It opened doors beyond Major League Baseball. So that, to me, is someone that has to be honored, not just because you happen to be great at your sport.